all countries have these three major economic goals. And one is to promote economic growth. Okay? Now, on the AP exam, when they're going for long-run growth, you got to think of, like, some keys are like capital goods, because those are machines to make other things. Any improvement on quantity or quality of resources, technology or trade will promote economic growth. The second thing is to prevent unemployment. Okay? So that's why we fight recessionary gaps, because if you're in the recessionary gap, you have created unemployment. And then the third is keep prices stable, limit inflation. So those are the three goals every country has. Now, depending, are you a market economy to a command economy, the way you go about hitting those three goals are different. Okay? All right. The most important measure of growth is GDP. Okay? And GDP is the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within a country's border in 1 year. And up above on your handout, I gave you all the formulas, but we'll just go over some of them again. So GDP is the dollar value of final goods and services produced inside the United States in 1 year. Okay, go.
Do other countries call it GDP as well?
Yeah. Okay. Obviously produced within their borders.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so GDP does not include the value of intermediate goods. Meaning, if you sell tires to General Motors, selling tires to General Motors doesn't count because that's going to be part of the car. And if we would count the tires to GM, then the car, we would double pricing. So intermediate goods are not counted in GDP. What's counted is what's purchased by consumers, the final purchase. Okay? And it's usually in 1 year. Are you limping?
No.
Okay. I got limp bias now. I think everyone is. All right. An increase in real GDP over time would be economic growth, and that would be the long-run aggregate supply curve shifting or the production possibilities curve shifting out. And then an increase in real GDP per capita over time, because if it's real GDP per capita, it's then improvement of standard of living. Because that means each person, say, is benefiting by the economic growth. All right, what's not included in GDP? Like I said before, intermediate goods is not included. No multiple counting, only final goods. So a lot of times I like to ask, all these are included in GDP except, or all of these are not part of GDP except. To me, again, GDP is the final good, usually when the consumer is purchasing. Okay. Non-production transactions. So stocks are not part of GDP. Bonds are not part of GDP. When we talk about investment in GDP, we're talking about businesses investing in capital goods, things that make other things. So machines or factories. So stocks, bonds, not included. Used goods, not included. So if you resell your house, it's not part of GDP. Why? Because when it was sold new, it was counted in GDP, so we're not going to count it twice. And then the third thing, no illegal activities. So if you paid cash under the table for doing something, that's not part of GDP. Drugs are not part of GDP. Illegal drug sales, that is. Rite Aid is okay. I just want to clarify, Rite Aid is okay. Okay. Alright, so the expenditure approach, and there's two ways to count GDP. One is what we purchase, like what we spend on, and there's four things, and all of these are shifters of GDP. The one is consumer spending. Now, things that impact consumer spending would be increase or decrease in income, because then you'd have more disposable income. Investments. Again, investments being when businesses put money back into their own business. When businesses go out and open up factories. When businesses go out and buy machines. And that's different than the type of investment we look at with foreign countries, when they're investing in our bonds and stocks. The third is government spending. And then the fourth is net exports. Now, in government spending, again, Social Security is not part of GDP, because we're giving people money, but we're not getting a service or a good back for it. Okay? And then net exports, exports minus imports. And I think there was a question on someone's essay on the last exam. If imports increase, aggregate demand decreases, right? Because you got exports minus imports, now you have a negative number, so that's going to shift aggregate demand to the left. Could you guys see? Okay. All right, so there's GDP equal consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. Okay, and that in our graph is the aggregate demand equals that. Okay, so any shift of anything in GDP shifts aggregate demand. All right, calculating nominal versus real. You don't have to dress up to come, but you're looking sharp. I like it. All right, so if a country's GDP increases from 4 billion to 5 billion, is the country experiencing economic growth? The answer is, we really don't know. Okay, why? We might be making more goods and services increasing from 4 to 5 billion, or inflation might have just drove us up from 4 to 5 billion. So, GDP by itself is not a perfect indicator of economic growth. So let's step back. What is inflation? A rising general level of prices. So that's when, like, PL in your graph increases, price levels are going up, that is inflation. So, just to make it easy, if the economy is just apples, and we produce 10 apples at $1 each, the GDP is 10. The next year, if we produce 10 apples at $1.25, the GDP is $12.50. So here, GDP went up, however, we're not producing more. So this is kind of nominal GDP. Somewhere, maybe on the practice questions we were talking about, they talked about nominal output, okay? And this would be kind of nominal output. It's not taking in inflation. Okay? So, we're going to go to nominal versus real. Nominal is GDP measured in current prices. It does not account for inflation, like we just did this last example. So it's a GDP measured in current prices, which does not account for inflation from year to year. Real GDP is expressed in constant or unchanging dollars. So that takes inflation in. is there a line for income approach? Okay, so all you need to write for there is expenditures equal income, okay? Because for every dollar we spend, someone else is making a dollar, okay? So expenditures equal income. Now, where this sometimes comes in handy, Maddie, is sometimes you know your GDP goes up, and they ask you something like, what's happened to income in the United States? Well, if GDP increases, then income increases, okay? And if income increases, then we have more money to spend, sometimes on foreign countries' imports. You guys did a great job the other day, by the way.
Yeah, Maddie too.
Huh?
And Swansea. Yeah.
Everyone. Okay. Real GDP is the best measure of economic growth because it's taking inflation in. So if real GDP, which by the way is what we graph, if real GDP is increasing, then we know that we're producing more goods and services.
There you got it.
Did I have the real GDP per capita?
Yes.
Okay, so that's real GDP over the population.
I don't know why it's there.
So what does that tell us?
Huh?
What does that tell us? Just like
It kind of instead, it's kind of showing that the standard of living of the population is improving. Alright, so I'm going to give you the business cycle here, give you a second to copy it. At your peak here in the business cycle, you have your inflation. That's when we're in the inflationary gap, okay, on your graph. As you go down as you're starting to go down and below at your trough, you have unemployment. And that's your kind of recessionary gap. And again, you kind of have, as inflation goes up, unemployment goes down, and we see that more with the Phillips curve. And then here, when price levels go down, unemployment goes up. Okay? Now, even though you have your peaks and valleys in the in the business cycle, real GDP over time is consistently increasing. Okay? Now, what gets these peaks and valleys? First, some advance in technology. A lot of times when technology advances, that helps get a peak, or productivity improves. Pessimism and optimism in the country. The country's pessimistic, that a lot of times is going to lead into one of the valleys. And then outside influences, like supply shocks. Okay? So if there's something happening with oil supply, that will affect the business cycle. Supply shocks, negative supply shift, lead to higher prices, lower output, stagflation. Always a favorite question on the AP exam. Okay? So there's your business cycle. And I should mention, any 6-month period of decline is generally called a recession. Okay? And if it's just horrible decline, then we get depressed. Okay? All right, unemployment. Everyone's favorite. Okay, the unemployment rate is the percentage of people in the labor force who want a job but are not working. And there is the simple formula. Unemployment rate equal unemployed over labor force times 100. The key is who's who in there. So, who is in the labor force? You gotta be above 16 years old, able and willing to work. So if you're not looking for work, you're not part of the labor force. That might have been next. Not institutionalized, meaning you're not in a jail or a hospital, which you really couldn't work. And not in the military or school or retired. So your labor force, you have to be above 16, you got to be willing to work. So if you're a stay-at-home mom, you're not looking for work, you're not in the labor force, you're not unemployed. If you've given up, you're unemployed, you've been fired, and you've given up, you're not in the labor force. Okay? All right, not institutionalized, and not in the military or school or retired. All right, then you have your three types. The first one is going to be frictional unemployment. That's kind of temporary. You're between jobs. So if you graduate college and you're looking for a job, you're in the frictional unemployment. You're kind of between jobs. If you're quitting one job looking for another, that's frictional unemployment.